So I will hand over to Natalia Jaresko, who's the Finance Minister for Ukraine.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I'm very appreciative of this immense amount of attention to our panel session, and I want to thank my fellow panel participants, and especially Commissioner Hahn, for making the journey to Kiev again. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the macroeconomic situation in Ukraine and what it will take for us to get our country back on its feet. I'll give you just a flavor, and I assure you it's a small flavor of the reforms that we already have started implementing. Should I go down? Under our still somewhat new government. That's not going to work. Iris will then be able to build on that and give a deeper dive into our plan to revitalize the economy and return to growth. As you all know, Ukraine's economic situation is very serious. We had almost 7% drop in GDP in 2014, and GDP this year is projected to fall by minimum 5.5%. The most recent forecasts are even worse than that at 7.5%. Inflation is expected to be somewhere in the range of 30%. And the depreciation of our currency by as much as 70% at one point during the year, with official borrowing at levels that are somewhat dangerous from a public sector perspective, make the situation that much more critical. On top of this, our foreign currency reserves, as you probably heard at some point, were little more than $5 billion. That was before the first IMF tranche in March. That first IMF tranche doubled our international reserves. The current economic crisis is, though, the result not of one crisis, but of four successive catastrophes that have created these conditions. It's the perfect economic storm for anyone looking for a story. From 74 years of communism to 23 years of incomplete reforms, little development of the rule of law, then the kleptocratic Yanukovych regime, which added tens of billions of state debt, followed by a devastating and the ongoing war. The challenge we're facing is that Ukraine's economic situation needs to be stabilized and improved while we're simultaneously being repeatedly wounded in the east of our country. But there is no alternative to our success for our government. It is simply our future as an independent state, an independent and sovereign state that is at the heart of everything we do. It brings me great relief to stand here today in front of you and say that we have made great strides in stabilizing the financial situation in Ukraine, thanks in large part to the agreement with the IMF. Before this, we were near a full-blown financial meltdown with rapid depreciation of the hryvnia and our dwindling foreign reserves. But in March, with the agreement to give us a $17.5 billion extended fund facility over 4 years, that also helped us to unblock additional bilateral, multilateral funds, including those from the EU, the United States, Japan, Canada, and others, totaling some $7.5 billion. It helped us calm the markets, and we've gotten greater certainty. I'll call that step one. We can put that behind us now. We have so much further to do ahead of us. With this IMF program, it's important to note that this is our program. This is the program of the Ukrainian government that we basically took to the IMF, amended, and defined further, but it is our roadmap for our path of reforms. And this new 4-year program hopefully will allow us to stabilize our macroeconomic situation and then return to growth in 2016. The IMF's $5 billion first disbursement is hopefully only $5 of $10 billion that we would expect to be disbursed in this first year of the program to help us jumpstart our economy. But it does more than that. It provides a path to recovery of the economy overall. And in order to deliver this recovery, and many of you have read about this in the press, we need as a priority to ensure the medium-term sustainability of our debt. The IMF estimates that our needs as financial needs overall from the year 2015 to 18 are some $40 billion. Of that $40 billion, 17.5 comes from the IMF, 7.5 comes from bilateral, multilateral, and the remaining $15.3 billion gap needs to be filled. And as many of you are aware, we're in consultations to renegotiate, restructure our public debt, and achieve $15 billion in savings for the public sector during this period, 2015 to 2018. But how do we get the economy back up and running? Stabilization is not enough. It's not enough for our population. It's not enough for us. Getting the country back up and running means a flourishing, prosperous Ukraine with investments pouring in from those of you representing the private sector, economic growth, job creation, decreasing poverty, and increasing the purchasing power of the average citizens in Ukraine. And this will require fundamental change in the legal, administrative, financial conditions to ultimately create a business-friendly environment free of corruption, free of fraud, free of criminality. And in a word, it means completely reforming Ukraine's economy and much of the way business has been done in the past. I'll briefly just mention a couple of these things. Fiscal policy, my area. We are embarking on a fresh, holistic review of our tax policy. My advisor, Ivan Miklos, here in the front row. We're looking for a way to encourage both domestic and foreign businesses to invest in Ukraine again, to come up with a policy that will broaden the tax base, more fairly share the tax burden, while balancing the need for revenue with investor and business-friendly, simple taxes. We're doing this to bring commercial activity out of the shadow economy. We've done it already with payroll tax breaks and with the simplification of the fiscal system, reducing the number of taxes from 20 to 11 this past December. We're ensuring that all businesses and industries pay their fair share, closing fiscal loopholes, getting rid of transfer pricing, things that were exploited for years by some big businesses to avoid taxation, to avoid paying their fair share. A new electronic VAT system has been introduced to increase transparency, reduce fraud that has cost the government estimates of $1 billion a year in the past. We've initiated many of our government's early sweeping reforms also in our energy sector, an area that was particularly ripe for this type of overhaul. We slashed the deficit of our state-owned energy company, Naftogaz, from about $10 billion last year to about $1.5 billion this past year. And our goal is to wipe out that deficit entirely by the end of 2016. We've just increased residential gas tariffs, so that the increase that was felt April 1st was some 450%, 70% for heating. And we've introduced tailored energy subsidies. We've done this to increase energy efficiency. We've done this to end the unacceptable, corrupt arbitrage, rent-seeking behavior that occurred in this country previously. And we've done this to ensure that we're providing support, not just to anyone, but to those who are truly in need, rather than the wealthiest or the largest gas consumers. We've adopted legislation to unbundle Naftogaz, our state oil and gas monopoly, and bring Ukraine into line with the competition rules of the third energy package of the EU. This is an important development because it also creates real investment opportunities in the unbundled Naftogaz, in storage, in distribution, and in production. We've stamped out graft by eliminating the past practices of intermediaries who used to stand between Ukraine and the ultimate seller of the gas, whether it was Gazprom or whether today 2/3 of our gas is being purchased from the European Union reverse flow. In none of these directions, neither with Gazprom nor with Europe, are there intermediaries anymore in our trade. We've also now launched a review of our oil and gas royalty scheme with full recognition that the current scheme does not meet the needs of investors, is not investor-friendly enough, and yet we need to find something that will balance our fiscal needs and investor friendliness. We encourage, and we want to continue to encourage and increase our domestic energy production. So we're not afraid to learn from our own mistakes. The banking system, critical for Ukraine, critical for all of business, is obviously a very important part of the renewal of this country's economy. And we can only return to growth if we can restart lending, establish a level playing field in the banking sector. I think this is somewhat underway already. We've adopted legislation targeting our banking sector for the past 4 months. In March, the Parliament adopted important legislation to resolve failing banks quickly, more transparently, and inject more justice into the financial system. The related party lending law that was adopted, as an example, strengthens law enforcement in those situations where bank owners or related parties have purposefully, fraudulently, or criminally defrauded depositors of their money. This has contributed to many bank failures, and they should be brought to justice. This will also enable the government to pursue and recover assets from those bank owners, while we then protect our everyday citizens' deposits. Finally, on rule of law, probably an area that covers everything, and you've heard me mention it in fiscal and in energy policy, but it's even broader than that. We've set up a new and independent law enforcement agency, fully funded at Western salary levels. We've named the new head, a young prosecutor, and this new National Anti-Corruption Bureau is tasked to investigate corruption at the highest levels by government employees, public officials, ministers, former ministers, and private legal entities. We replaced top-level officials in tax, in customs, in the Emergency Management Agency. And the general prosecutor, in the last, 6, maybe 8 weeks, has charged dozens of people at all levels in all parts of the geography of this country. That's the stick that you use when fighting corruption, but there's also the carrot. And the carrot is policy changes that we're making. The policy changes include judicial reform to start the elimination of corruption in the courts. It was adopted by the RADA, and now we have the process of reducing judges, paying them better, and insisting on financial asset disclosure of those judges who remain in office. Civil service reform passed in its first reading tomorrow, initial reading, not tomorrow, last week. And that means that in civil service, we will start to see a change, in particular from the bottom. If you couple that civil sector reform law with the fact that last year we reduced civil sector by 10%, this year we've committed to reduce it by another 20%, the combination of reducing the civil sector but then maintaining those funds to pay better those who remain will be a big part of the change as we move forward. Transparent public databases and e-procurement, other things happening in the ministries themselves to try and change the policy environment that breeds corruption or has bred corruption in the past. Corruption was unfortunately the hallmark of our tax service for far too long, and that's why in addition to giving our tax service the type of tax policy, the overhaul that I described, we're also in the course of appointing a new head of our state fiscal service, and I assure you that the transparency involved in the process of selection itself is unheard of in Ukraine. We did much of this with the participation of civil society, different business associations, the American Chamber of Commerce, the European Business Association, the Ukrainian Industrial Group. We also did it with the participation of professional recruiters. It was completely unique. We haven't gotten to the end of the process yet, but I assure you that there hasn't been any political intervention. We cannot wait for all the conditions in our country to be perfect before initiating these necessary reforms. But I think we've made substantial progress, and I think we have a very ambitious program going forward. We have to act now, because this is part of this greater transition. We want to transition from assistance, bilateral and multilateral, to private investment development. We're not looking for a free ride. In fact, the opposite applies. Ukraine is a valuable partner of the international community and wants to be renewed, re-energized by the private sector to restart and redouble investing in Ukraine. And so one of our first efforts is to focus on the official investment that comes into our country and is the anchor and catalyst, the IFC, the World Bank, the EBRD, the EIB, the EIF, KfW, and others. I'm sure Iris will tell you more about the current and future reforms, but let me just conclude that I myself was an investor several months ago. In fact, I think my former business partners are in the room, and I fully understand just how hard it is and how this can be a very challenging place for investment. Our country is facing the most serious economic situation and is not out of the woods yet. However, as a result of this conference, there's some very interesting investment opportunities. And I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, David Rubenstein of the Carlyle Group, who I think has never talked about Ukraine before, spoke about opportunities, and he spoke specifically about Ukraine. He said, Ukraine is an extremely attractive place to invest today. And I think that recognition means a great deal from someone like Mr. Rubenstein. Ukrainian assets are undervalued. Successful investors who try to operate with a counter-cyclical mindset will know that the best opportunities present themselves in situations like the one we're facing today. The depreciation of the hryvnia has favorably driven our exports to new strengths. Taken together with the DCFTA, Ukraine presents an opportunity to be the platform for exports into the European Union. And lastly, I think I'm very proud to serve with colleagues who are very reformist, very professional, with a president, a prime minister, and a parliament who are very focused and united and are working to create a fair and open business environment. I hope that you'll hear more today that convinces you, and I hope that you will take home the message that Ukraine is open for investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Iuescu. I now hand over to Minister Abramavicius.
Natalie, thank you very much for a great rundown. It's always very difficult to speak after yourself, but I will try to come up with a few more good stories to convince you that reform process has started indeed in our country. But now just, let's go slightly back and look at what type of macroeconomic situation did we inherit. We had 36 consecutive months of industrial production decline. We have 50% inflation rate. So situation has not been really in our favor. But last 2 months we have a stable exchange rate thanks to Ministry of Finance, Central Bank and international financial support that we received. I think consumer confidence is slightly coming back, and some of the business surveys show that perhaps the lowest but perhaps the worst point in the history of our economy has already been passed. So I'm an optimist. Reforms that country is undertaking, obviously, needless to say, are not for EU, for US, or for the World Bank. I mean, these reforms, the long overdue reforms, are needed, first of all, for Ukraine, for our people. For 2 decades, we have been hesitating when tough decisions were about to be made, but I dare to conclude that this time is different, primarily because there is a critical mass of people in the parliament, in the government, in presidential administration that are ready to undertake some of these radical steps to reform the country. Many of us are very fresh to public administration, and like myself and Natalie, we're as fresh as December 2, when the new government was sworn in. I was tasked at that time by the Prime Minister to draft a government agenda for the year 2015. In just a few days and after a few sleepless nights, we had a government plan in place, and we decided to give this ambitious agenda code name Icebreaker.ua. It was supposed to symbolize a heavy icebreaker that moves across the icy and stormy seas. It meets a lot of resistance, but it still, is breaking the system and is consistently and without doubt moving ahead. Eventually, the program was approved, but the name did not stick. We did not think that society is ready for radical names. We did not think that society will speak about anything else but the name of the reform plan. I think we seriously underestimated our people. The desire for swift action on a multiple of fronts is highly demanded by the society. As you all know, we are here today to update you on the reforms, and I'm pleased to really report that there is progress that is being witnessed and acknowledged on a number of areas: energy sector, anti-corruption, reform of police, decentralization, de-oligarchization, deregulation, and a few more. Our focus has been and shall remain on building new Ukraine, a Ukraine that identifies and utilizes the best practices in every area of government and building a vibrant market economy that will one day be the envy of all our neighbors. To seek out these best practices, we have over 140 advisors in the government from abroad, European Union, US, a number of other countries. So here we draw on the best practices from the countries that recently underwent some of these reform processes themselves. We have a unique chance of leapfrogging, avoiding mistakes that some of our neighbors, some of our friends have made on the way to achieve good results in these respective areas. So here we have Ivan Miklos, former finance minister, former deputy prime minister of Slovakia, working half-time in Ukraine, advising Minister of Finance on the tax reform, on economic policy myself. We have former Deputy Minister of Economy of Lithuania, Domas Audiskas, working full-time on the state-owned enterprise reform. We have a fleet of Georgians working on judicial reform, healthcare reform, public procurement, and a number of other issues sitting there quietly in the corner. We have Americans, obviously, helping out with the police reform and we're doing decentralization according to the Swedish and the Polish model. So here we clearly draw on the best experiences that there are out there. When it comes to business climate, President and Prime Minister, who have been ministers of economy in the past themselves, said from day one that deregulation is a priority number one for the Minister of Economy. So the way I look at deregulation is that not all reforms need to be painful, and deregulation is certainly not a reform that society will experience any pain. It's the public servants, it's the corrupt officials that will not be happy with our actions, but otherwise it's the business community and the rest of the society that will feel, hopefully, the positive effects of very quick and swift actions on that front. We decided to split deregulation into the 3 stages. First, called removing access barriers to do business. Second, the so-called guillotine approach. And the third, basically to create preventive mechanisms that some of these regulatory agencies that we will close down, that they do not pop up later under a different name. The first stage has been relatively successful. 2 laws have been passed in the parliament, 2 government decrees. Number of activities that require licensing have been decreased by over 40%. A huge amount of all kinds of permits have been removed as well, because wherever there is a license or a permit, business spends time on it. Business obviously is experiencing some corrupt situations. Simple, things as a result of which maybe, what has been scrapped is we have had good success on the monitoring of procedure for oil and gas industry. That's about 5 billion hryvnias that's been paid by the companies to corrupt state officials. When it comes to certificates in agriculture sector, quarantine certificates and issuance of phytosanitarian certificates, that's also been simplified or abolished, and it's another almost 3 billion hryvnia back to the sector. The next step in the first stage was twofold. We have worked together with a business and identified another 130 pain points that have been put in the regulation plan recently enacted by the government. If we fulfill those within 12 months, we believe that we will rise in doing business ratings by about 20 places. Right now, Ukraine ranks number 96 in the world. We had a meeting with chief economists of the World Bank in Washington last week. Most of the countries do pay a very close attention to where other countries rank in this rating, because this is a real illustration of the improvement or deterioration of investment conditions. Historically, one place up was also resulting in additional $600 million in foreign direct investment. So it is very important to work with these ratings. When it comes to guillotine, it has been attempted in Ukraine before. It has been attempted in a number of countries, but obviously we're more determined than before, and I would say we're more structured and coordinated than before as well. So late last week, the godfather of regulatory guillotine, Scott Jacobs, arrived to Ukraine. He was hired with a grant money from the World Bank, and thank you very much, World Bank, for that. For 3 weeks, he will do review of our regulatory framework, and hopefully we will hire him to do a 12-month-long guillotine, as a result of which the burden of proof will fall on the regulatory agencies, and in front of independent commission, they will have to prove that they are in line with free market practices, in line with EU standards, and there is no corruption element in activities of these agencies. If they fail to prove over the 12-month period, they will stop existing. So we are very actively working on that. Second biggest reform has been state-owned enterprise reform for us. It is important to restructure state-owned enterprises also to create level playing field for a number of other businesses that operate in similar sectors. We have about 3,000 state-owned enterprises, only 1,833 in operation. There has been very little transparency into their business dealings. Many of them have been run in the interest of some specific private individuals rather than in the interest of the state. So we wanted really to look at the financial statements, make some conclusions, make some summaries, and so on. So I'm happy to announce today that today we're releasing the annual report for 2013 and 9 months 2014 of state-owned enterprises, largest 100. It's the first of a kind sort of a published report in Ukraine, but we'll do it on a regular basis. It was done by the Ministry of Economy with the help of Dragon Capital, with the help of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and with the assistance of the British government. So what are the conclusions there? Conclusions are that state is certainly a weak owner of a bunch of good assets. We have over 1 million people employed in the sector, but the sector does not give back enough to the state. First 9 months 2014, 500 million hryvnia was only paid in dividends from the state-owned companies, which, you know, as a return on equity of these companies represents a yield of only 0.14%. That's nothing. If you look at the assets, the return has been miserable as well, because collectively these companies amounted losses reached 80 billion hryvnias. If you apply a normal standardized return on assets, those companies should have generated a positive return of about 80 billion hryvnia. There is a number of initiatives that we already passed when it comes to reform of state-owned enterprises. We formed also a very high-profile sort of a commission, including head of EBRD here in the country, head of Warsaw Stock Exchange, a number of other distinguished colleagues. We also set up individually also a nomination committee for selecting in a new procedure CEOs for state-owned companies. We also approved new rules for auditing, so that top 50 companies are audited by reputable international companies, which has not been the case before. Next thing is that we are proposing government to corporatize top 100 companies, which has not been the case as well. There's no boards in majority cases. Even if there are boards, it's mostly public servants serving on these boards, so corporatization will improve massively corporate governance standards. And one last thing, but not the least important, is that we are working on the compensation schemes for top management of state-owned enterprises. Because obviously, when compensation is low, when it is capped by some of the populist politicians, it is hard to overcome all these temptations to benefit from corrupt schemes. So we work on all these areas simultaneously, and we're achieving some success. Ministry is also in parallel with developing economic strategy for the country, which even Miklos gladly is overseeing the effort of, and we agreed in 2 months. We have a full sort of a strategy of economic vision of the country in place. Is also working a lot on anti-corruption activities. And Natalie mentioned some of the success that government overall has achieved on that front. Here we also need to mention that ministry is very much involved in, for example, oil auctions of Ukernafta. So first thing what we did, we removed a 15% discount that was in place and some of the business tycoons were benefiting from. On an annual basis, it accounted up to $200 million a year. And for the first time in the history of Ukraine, in March, at an auction of Ukernafta, this oil was sold without any discount after 2 months, auction, was blocked. We also have, as a government and as a whole, and with the help of President, a situation where finally tycoons are little by little giving up control of the state assets. President clearly said that private assets need to be managed by the private owners, state assets need to be managed by the state. So we see that control of Ukernafta and Ukrtransnafta are also returning back to the state, which means that reform of other state-owned enterprises is also going to meet less resistance in the future. With the help of European Business Association and others, we also removed a very corrupt company called Ukreco Resurse, which existed for 14 years, was supposed to be involved in package utilization in the country, but only collected money and never collected any waste and never recycled any waste, and was used as a company that was financing political parties. And business community told me from day one that this would be the sort of an indication of government's determination to do reforms if we push with the closure of this company. I travel a lot abroad and here and speak to business. One of the biggest complaints in this country is about anti-monopoly committee. I know there are some rulings that are due about the retailers that anti-monopoly committee is, among other things, accusing of basically having an agreement and price fixing and so on. And in the US, 1 in 3 companies complain about anti-monopoly committee. General Electric is acquiring Alstom as we speak. Ukraine is the last country to approve this global merger. And it's not the first case when Ukraine is the last country standing on the way of a global merger. So in IMF memorandum, we are committed to change head and the whole committee in the first half of the year and change legislation altogether in the second half. It is going to be very, very important, especially as we will try to demonopolize some of the sectors where unfair concentration has been achieved over the years. So I will stop shortly here. I will just say that thank you all for coming. This conference brought in together 550 delegates. 85 countries and IFIs are represented here, so it's a huge achievement. We thank you all for the support that you have given. Ukraine certainly appreciates that. Next, as the Prime Minister said, is that we are ready to do investment-focused conferences. It's going to be end of May in June in Berlin, possibly with the detour to Stuttgart and Hamburg. Then 13th of July in the US, and we spoke with the US side about the format of that. And then the big one, obviously, in autumn. And we hope by that time there is going to be also more clarity towards privatization. Because right now, privatization theme is very hot. It's been actively debated both in the parliament and in the media. Hopefully by that time, security situation in the country will improve as well, and we will be able to proceed, with a transparent, process of selling some of the state assets to strategic, foreign, transparent owners. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Hart to say a few words.
Thank you very much, ministers in the plenary. It's good to have so many representatives and knowledgeable people here. And this is clearly a sign for not only the success of this event, but for the huge interest to contribute to the further development, not to say recovery of Ukraine, because I think one is crystal clear, Ukraine has an extraordinary potential. If you look into the country, the capacities of the people, I think there is no doubt about the potential which is here and which should be tapped. We all know that there are traditional strengths in Ukraine which relates to the heavy industry, but also to the agriculture. But the future is yours to design how the country should look like. By the way, same exercise we face in the European Union, so in that respect we are already in the same boat. The aim must be to make Ukraine as attractive to outside investors as, say, for instance, your neighbor Poland or the Baltic countries. And that will require making changes, and it was really impressive what we just heard by the two ministers, what already has been introduced. And I think having in mind that you're only less than half a year in office, the track record already is an impressive one and gives a lot of hope and promise to the future. Ukraine's current challenging economic situation is partly due, of course, to the situation in the East. But let me be frank, it's also due to the very poor business climate in the country since the independence. Reforms are underway, but there is much more to be done, but this is something everybody knows pretty well. The European Union is doing more than it has ever done for a country that is not a member, with funding, with expertise, and in that respect, I would say it's not necessary to compare our activities within the Union with countries outside the Union. We have to target the needs of our countries inside and, may I say, outside in the neighborhood. And I think if Ukraine needs less money than Greece, that should be something which should be highlighted positively and not critically. So in that respect, may I say, and I hope it stays. But there are no indications that there are any changes, and may I say the magnitude is very different on that. What we have done so far is we have promised 11 billion, and so far 6 billion of that has been mobilized, with much of our support linked to reform conditionalities. I'm happy to say that your government is indeed making efforts to meet the conditions set, and once again, what we have heard, for instance, in the area of deregulation is really, I would say already today, for a lot of member states in the Union, a role model. Yeah? When I was looking into the speed, how fast you can fund a company here in Ukraine already compared to many other European countries, I think we have approved the Small Business Act in 2008 or 2009 in the European Union, meaning that European countries should commit themselves to provide legislation to allow funding of companies within 3 days. And so far, I think after 7-8 years, only 5-6 have introduced this into their national legislation or procedure. So there's always room for improvement everywhere, and everybody should clean in front of his door. I think Europe has to make a lot of reforms in our countries and as an institution because it's about growth, and in that respect we are back to Ukraine. Ukraine needs the right regulation and, of course, investment climate, and there needs to be continued progress towards a full market economy. With my political and, country background, I'm in favor of a social, economic, ecologic market economy which covers elements of the social dimension and the ecological dimension in order to present the country also very future-oriented and fit for the future, and respecting also the interests and needs of people in the 21st century. What does it mean to live in a market economy, ladies and gentlemen? A true market economy is one that is based on the rule of law and where there is fair and open competition. The success of a company should be measured by its capacity to sell its products or services with a profit margin, not by its ability to secure subsidized public procurement contracts or regulations that exclude foreign or national competitors from the market. Quite the opposite. Public regulation is needed, for instance, to enforce competition rules and avoid the abuse of dominant positions. But beyond this, the logic of supply and demand should operate without public interference. That is why we are working with IVARES on deregulation in order to implement exactly these principles which are more than principles. This is something in order to survive and to shape our common future. So when businesses face these difficulties with the administration, tax authorities, for instance, they should not have to rely on their connections inside the government or the administration or on the goodwill of the latter, but rather on the rule of law. Politicians should be there to decide the rules and to ensure that framework assists for their proper implementation. No less, but no more either. Business can solve its own problems without their help, provided that courts do their job in a fair, timely, and transparent manner. Rule of law is at the top of our joint reform agenda, and yesterday I was able to discuss with the President some first reform steps that must be swiftly followed by further work. Creating the right business climate is also about driving out corruption. I welcome the progress on setting the legal framework for the new anti-corruption institutions. Now, Ukraine has to show it can take a stand against corruption. Ukraine needs a new business ethic that outside investors can trust, and that will only come when there is confidence in an impartial, active system of justice that penalizes wrongdoing. The right business climate is also about encouraging innovation and diversification. To remain competitive, we all have to keep pace with changing markets. Ukraine needs to work out how to add value to your traditional production. In today's world, the promotion and internationalization of your small and medium-sized enterprises will be crucial for the relaunch of the Ukrainian economy. At the present, small and medium-sized enterprises account for only 12% of the GDP. Most SMEs are concentrated in your 5 biggest cities. There is huge scope to develop this kind of enterprise, which in the Union, let me tell you, is the prime creator of jobs. It's the backbone of an economy. SMEs create the jobs. And I always compare the situation in the Union or the relevance of SMEs. We still, unfortunately, have around 26, 27 million unemployed people. And we have around 23 million SMEs in Europe. So if only each of the existent SMEs would employ another unemployed person, the problem of unemployment would be really solved. But unfortunately, we have a bad distribution of unemployment. But if you would leave this problem to the 500 biggest companies in Europe, each of them would have to employ around 50,000 people, which is even theoretically impossible. What you need is a sound combination between industry and SMEs. If you have only SMEs, I think this is too weak. If you have only industry, I have no example for that, but probably this also would not work out. And if Europe would only be a tourist destination, probably this would also do less. Yeah? So we need a sound combination of everything. That's why reindustrialization is one of the most important issues in Europe, not only in the European Union or not only in your country. I think it's a general issue that we have to work on a further reindustrialization. I think the general level of industrialization in Europe is at around 12–13%, and we have this common goal of 20%, which I hope we can achieve, but at least we should be aware about this and we should be focused on it in order to deliver on that. I think this is the reason, once again, why we are putting such a big push behind SME development in Ukraine in this year, in 2015, to support the private sector development and the economic recovery. So that's why I'm so pleased to announce that the Commission has just taken 2 decisions worth together 110 million euro in support of SMEs in Ukraine. 70 million of this will support the development of SMEs across Ukraine and early recovery of those regions most affected by the conflict, and another 40 million will contribute to a loan guarantee fund which will help SMEs to access finance through local banks. This funding will also facilitate Ukraine's participation in the EU's research and innovation program Horizon 2020. Also, this is something in terms of future orientation which has to be addressed as early as possible. It's about innovation. I will catch my flight. The package will also help to set up, but something has to be said, because I think if I'm once here and miss the college meeting, as I was already not really criticized by my president, he appreciated that I stayed here and not being in Strasbourg, where we have always the opportunity to come together. But it's important to be here and to work together with all of you in order to improve the situation. And for that, I would like to miss a plane. The package will also help us to set up the business support centers to cover 15 regions. This will be managed by the EBRD. Thank you to the EBRD. And once again, thank you for the excellent cooperation, but also EIB and the other financial institutions. These centers will support entrepreneurship by providing advice and expertise on how to access financing. We hope this can help launch new businesses and contribute to a new start for people who have had to leave their homes due to the conflict. This is something which is not really mentioned today, but I think we should be aware. We are talking about 1.5 million internal displaced people in Ukraine, and this is a huge challenge for each affected person, for the families, but also for the society to deal with this. And I pay tribute to this, to your efforts. You have so far achieved to deal with this challenge, because in Europe we are discussing occasionally about some couple of thousand refugees, but you are facing 1.5 million, and this is a great effort one should not estimate, and we should really appreciate what you have managed, because if only 20% of them would start to move towards Europe, there would be some other discussions than we are facing just today. So one should be aware what you have afforded so far. I hope that all these activities can contribute and help launch new businesses and contribute that a new start for people is possible. All this is part of a wider coordinated effort that we coordinate under the Eastern Partnership to improve access to finance through programs and loans implemented by the international financial institutions. But perhaps the most important thing that will transform your business climate and attractiveness to investment is indeed the deep and comprehensive free trade area, better known in the meantime as DCFTA. That is due to come into force with the Union on the 1st of January next year, and this was also a clear outcome of the summit yesterday. There will be no any further delays. There will be no changes in the content. And this was confirmed by the President and the Prime Minister of Ukraine. This was confirmed by the two presidents, Juncker and Tusk. So I think, if anything, if we can rely on anything, then on the confirmation of these four guys. The implementation of the DCFTA is about reforming your economy and even your society. It will bring challenges, certainly, but many new opportunities for the business sector. It will help Ukraine approximate to the European Union's world-class norms and standards in ways that will ultimately boost its competitiveness and foreign direct investment. As you know, the European Union already unilaterally removed almost all its tariffs in April 2014. Ukraine will benefit from some transitional periods after DCFTA enters into force, but business needs to be preparing right now for the new competitive environment that is opening up to you. The European Union will therefore support implementation of the DCFTA with another initiative to help SMEs seize new trade opportunities, improving access to finance and helping businesses comply with the European standards. All this will be done by blending grants with loans from European financial institutions with a capacity to leverage 10 times the funding we put in. So, ladies and gentlemen, to build a better business environment and to achieve prosperity for the people of Ukraine, the government must continue to take steps to respect land and property rights, promote effective regulation, root out corruption and create the condition for business to grow. Easy to be said, but difficult and challenging to implement. But this is, I think, our joint task, and all of us being here today from 58 countries have confirmed their readiness to support the country by being here, and we all rely on your support also in the future. What the EU can do is not only to provide money, but also experts from the European institutions, but also from our member states. I have to say, I think it's high time to coordinate our support, not to overstretch and overburden you with too many experts, and finally there are too many cooks, and this might create some turbulences. So it's also our task to coordinate our support better, but we also need very concrete requests from your side, what is really needed, that this is still a support and not a burden. Because what the Union wants to see is a modern and prosperous Ukraine. We will give you all the political, financial and technical support we can, but nothing we can do will replace the work you have to do, and the work of ministers in creating the right environment. And I have to say, and I could witness this, also their teams. It's, of course, the leader has to go ahead, but without team, without troops, you are nowhere. So it's really something where you need team spirit, and we need the joint right approach to achieve something and to work on something. For us, once again, what I could already say in the plenary today, Ukraine is the most important, because also of your number of inhabitants, neighbors. For us, peace, stability, prosperity in our neighborhood is in our own interest. This is why we are supporting you, beside, if you like, the personal interest, the humanitarian interest, but it's in our own interest to create peace, stability, and prosperity. And may I say, not only to our neighbors, but also, if they like, to the neighbors of our neighbors. But they have to accept our hands, but they have also to do their homeworks in order to correct decisions, correct activities they have done, in order to come back and to work together on a better future for our people, because we should not forget, we serve our citizens, and this should be on top of our list, what should be done every day. Thank you very much.
And now we'll hand over to Monsieur Malige.
So I guess now I can speak freely about the EU, I suppose. No, I have only good things to say, no worries. No, first of all, I'd like to offer the best regards from the president of the BRD, Suma Chakrabarti, who couldn't be here today. He actually has a very good excuse for not being here today, because we hold tomorrow the pledging conference for Chernobyl at the headquarters of the bank tomorrow in London, to help ensure that this tragedy of the past is put to rest for good. Today's conference is about the future of Ukraine. And when we look at the future of Ukraine, of course, there's various angles, and people have expanded on them. There's political angles and economic angles. Investment is, of course, one of the very important ones. We've been investing in Ukraine in good and bad times for over more than 20 years, over more than 2 decades, through crisis, through reform, through the best and the worst. And about a year ago, after the revolution, we saw that a fundamental change was starting to take place in this country. And I want to congratulate and recognize the work of the government, of the central bank, and of the parliament of this country, because they have proved that they could take radical and courageous decisions and pass landmark laws in the most difficult of times. So when we saw that this was starting to take shape, we completely reconsidered our approach to this country last year. We decided to double our investment amount. So these are not just kind words, but these are kind words that come with putting our money where our mouth is. We went from a modest 500 million euros to a more ambitious 1 billion euro for 2014. In the end, we achieved 1.2 billion euros, bringing the total volume of investments of EBRD in this country to over 10 billion since we started operating more than 20 years ago. Now, restarting private sector investment means, of course, building an environment where private sector can thrive. And right now, it's a good time because the intrinsic competitiveness of Ukraine is at the highest it's ever been. You have a cost base which compares to some countries in Southeast Asia, but you have a skill base in this country which is not the same, which is at the level of some of the neighbors, or even better. And so it is a very favorable intrinsic situation. At the highest level, there are two radical reforms and unique initiatives which can contribute to transforming the way this economy is working. And it's been mentioned already. One is the energy sector reform, and the other is the banking sector reform. There's few areas, in fact, that can do more to create a better environment where companies can implement the energy efficiency investments that are so needed, that can allow a more level playing field between the large and the small companies, and that can create a more sustainable financing environment where large companies as well as SMEs can get access to finance. These major reforms have been started by this team. We are very happy and proud to support them together with our friends in the EU, together with the World Bank and the IMF, to help make them possible. Of course, I'm trying to be diplomatic here. It would be ideal if other factors were also improved. Better enforcement of laws, fair courts, greater focus on more private sector in the economy, privatization. But there is, I think, a roadmap and a team working to push reform through with an idea of what to do in all these areas. So this is also where EBRD can contribute to help these changes happen. Just to give you a few examples of how we work with the private sector in this country. First, we invest time. We invest time to provide advice to SMEs. Last year in December, we opened an office in Lviv dedicated to doing just that. We have a large team here in Kiev doing the same. And that helps companies structure themselves, grow, export, create jobs, create employment, and in the end, get more access to finance. We ourselves lend money to companies and we invest in their equity, companies that invest and that grow in this country. Every day, these clients demonstrate that it is possible to be successful in Ukraine while implementing sound integrity and governance standards. It is possible. These companies are in many sectors of the economy. In practice, we do have very diversified investments in Ukraine, but I'd like to point out that there are two sectors in particular which we think should attract investor attention. One is the agriculture and agribusiness, it's been mentioned before, and the other is information technologies. Last year we invested close to 200 million in agribusiness. One such example is in Odessa, where we invested in a grain terminal with, in partnership with the international Louis Dreyfus company. We also lend to banks so that they develop lending to SMEs, they develop lending to energy efficiency. That helps companies across the country access funding, which is really critical at this point. And last but not least, we keep the wheels of trade running and turning by providing critical finance to banks to facilitate trade finance. Now, going forward, We stand ready to participate and support the privatization efforts that Ivaras was mentioning, not just again with words and advice, but also with money. The development of the private sector in this country remains the heart of our mission. I'm confident that we can achieve a transformation of the economy in Ukraine provided there is a sufficiently stable macroeconomic framework, which the IMF program currently provides. So thank you, Jérôme. I see you behind the camera there. Continue providing the stable macroeconomic framework, please. And in partnership with other IFIs, the international community and the institutions of Ukraine, with a strong reciprocal commitment to each other to effectively implement reform on one side and to effectively support it and to effectively invest on the other side. We at EBRD, we've been a spearhead of this effort, and we intend to continue hand in hand with our partners in Ukraine and with our partners abroad who are here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is my microphone working? Yeah, it is. Now we have a bit of time to hear from some of the people on the front row. So if anyone of you wants to make some comments, why don't you sort of go up one by one to the podium and deliver them from there? You can decide amongst yourselves who should go first.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much. My name is Matthew Murray. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, which means I cover 117 countries in my portfolio. And somehow, I don't know how this has happened exactly, I seem to be spending a disproportionate amount of my time these days in Ukraine. And, you know, I think it has something to do with the spirit of the people, with the energy of the country, and the opportunity I have here to work with such gifted and talented ministers. You know, we don't always get the same welcome that we do in Ukraine and other countries, in even more mature markets or less mature markets, and it really has been quite a privilege to be able to work with both the ministers present with the Prime Minister and the entire reform team. It's also a great privilege to be with you here today. This group that's assembled here is part of the future of this country, and it is really quite an honor to be present with you. Why are we here? Well, of course, we're here because Ukraine has not quite met its potential yet. But it does have the best chance it's had in a generation to achieve its potential as an economic power in this part of the country. And as you listen, as you have today, to the different reform agendas of the different ministries, one cannot help but be very, very impressed with a couple of things. First of all, each of the different ministries, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, the Ministry of Infrastructure, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Justice, each of them has a very sort of specific agenda that's driven organically by where they found themselves when the Maidan happened and where they know they need to go. And so this is, one cannot help be impressed by the fact that this reform is not top-down. It's being driven from the bottom up. And moreover, in the face of what are systemic challenges, it is clear that you have a systemic strategy, that you are attacking this issue, the rent-seeking, the cronyism, the official corruption, the overregulation, that you are attacking those systemic issues from every conceivable angle, which is to say processes, new laws, changing people, removing intermediaries, guillotine on the regulation. And so this sends a very clear signal to the US business community, among other business communities. And that's why I'm here today. I represent, as a member of the President Obama's economic team, the business community. And we are here today because we want to see the US business community act as an accelerator of this reform effort. We think business can be a change agent, whether it's business from Ukraine, America, Europe, Japan, or other markets. Business can help reduce the rent seeking. Business can help create the conditions for competition. And so I was very pleased this morning when the Prime Minister in his opening remarks announced the fact that the U.S. Department of Commerce, along with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, will be hosting a U.S.-Ukraine Business Forum in July in Washington, D.C. And our goal in that forum is going to be to bring the American business community, business leaders from all industries, whether energy, agribusiness, health, IT, to meet the very impressive reform team led by the Prime Minister, and to take advantage of that moment to fuse new and better information into the bloodstream of corporate America. As you know, we're all in the middle of an information war, and the bad information is crowding out the good information. So we're going to use that forum as a critical moment to say to these C-suites in America that this is a great opportunity, that this is a glass half full, and it's time now to get yourselves ready to come back into this market. And so, in closing, let me say that, as Minister Jurasco said, 23 years of incomplete reform. You know, that's actually an opportunity when you think about it. Because if and when all these great reform strategies begin to yield results, what you're going to see is what economists call a governance premium. And a governance premium happens when a company that works in a market such as Ukraine has a kind of rule of law deficit, suddenly appears with transparent practices, with well-audited books, with great corporate governance. Guess what? Investors want to invest in that country, in that company, and they want to do so at a premium. And so this is what we're looking for. This is what we're striving for as the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. business community. And we'd like to encourage all of you, all the business communities represented here today, to join us in that and to create the conditions for real competition that will help grow this economy, grow the real economy here in a sustainable, balanced, and effective way going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Can we try and keep the contributions to 2 minutes at most, because we'd like to leave maybe 10 minutes at the end for questions, and we do need to finish at 5:15. So over to you.
Listen, thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief, because I think we all agree on the diagnostic. And let me first second what Matthew has said. We've been working very closely with Ukraine in the past few months, and I can say it's a pleasure working with you. Your can-do attitude is amazing. And I think if you continue like that, we very soon will invite you to visit other countries to help them in their reform processes, because it's really amazing, your attitude. We have just had the visit by President Poroshenko at the OECD. We discussed how we can strengthen our relations. And I think there are lots of things we're already doing together, but much more is still to come. The OECD, the best way to understand the OECD is as a global policy network. We have 34 member countries from the European Union, other Europeans, US, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia. There are 34 countries which are discuss how to help each other as peers, how to learn from each other's mistakes, from each other's successes. And there's a very strong willingness from our member countries to bring Ukraine as a peer in some of those policy discussions, be it on the issue of the design of a new competition policy framework, the reform of the SOEs, the issue related to the fight against corruption, SME policies, you name it. We have a very, very broad mandate, a very broad expertise, and all of that is open to cooperation with Ukraine. So what we need to look together here is how to move, indeed. It's relatively easy to design a perfect policy. It's very easy to look at practices all over the world, come up with a picture-perfect policy framework. The challenge is really how to implement it and make it work. And what our challenge together with our member countries and the expertise of our member countries is how to support Ukraine on that follow-up case. How can we best exploit our policy networks with experts from all those countries that I mentioned, and then be with Ukraine in a way, working hand with your hand, and help you as you move forward. So count on the OECD. There's a very strong political willingness from our side to work with you and to accompany you on your policy priorities. Thank you very much.
I'm delighted to be here. It's my second week in Kyiv as the president of the American Chamber of Commerce. I think the American Chamber of Commerce, we unite the business that's working here, and we are the voice. The four major areas which we're focusing on now is firstly to be the voice of the business community. Secondly, to be a platform for networking and business development, especially B2B for our members. Thirdly, to be a source of business information. And fourth, to promote Ukraine as an attractive business destination. What I've seen in my first 2 weeks here, I mean, I lived in Ukraine for 12 years. I was working in business here for many years, and I have been focused very much. The country has changed. And I think the first thing I'm seeing is the involvement of business in reforms in Ukraine. That is probably the biggest change I've seen. And we can see tangible examples of how the business reform is being taken place. For example, the activity of our chamber, other business organizations in appointing a business ombudsman whose deputies will be appointed this week, and including the appointment of a new fiscal head where my vice president spent probably more time working on that over the last week, and this is a very transparent process, and business is very much part of this. So in my 2 minutes, I think that business, you will be hearing from us. You'll be hearing from us when things go wrong, but also I think we will be passing that message when things go well. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ivan Mikloš. I'm advisor to Minister of Finance, Natalia Jaresko, and to Minister of Economy, Aivaras Abromovicius. When I came for the first time in Kyiv, it was last year in March. And from that time, I'm here relatively regularly. From February of this year, I serve as advisor not only to the most important economic ministers, but also to the most reform-oriented and reform-effort economic ministers, and I'm proud of this. And I'm speaking. Let me give you my impression what happened here during last year, because you can meet people who are very dissatisfied, people who are satisfied, who said okay. What is underestimated, hugely underestimated, is that reforms finally are about politics, about political will. And the most important what happened here during last year was that now, after Maidan, also because Maidan, Ukraine has strong president, strong parliament and government with very strong and clear legitimacy, European and reform legitimacy. And this is big achievement because it was not before, and if it was, then it was not used. Which means very important is that this time will be different, and I'm convinced that it will be different because more reasons for this. We have a lot of experiences from other transition countries, and what I see in the activity of the government, these experiences are actively used. And the Minister of Finance, Natalia Jaresko, and Minister of Economy, Aivaras Abromovicius, are personalized this, because what is the most important in the reforms is to connect macroeconomic stabilization measures, structural reforms, and institutional reforms. This is exactly what they are doing and what they are pushing. And I can confirm you that really these changes are permanent. They are preparing very intensively. For instance, it was created working group on tax reform, in which I participated also. I'm participating personally. And I can tell you that if everything will go as it was started, finally, not so far from here, from now, from the January of next year, Ukraine can have even better tax reform than Estonia or Slovakia. When we reformed Slovakian tax system, we reformed tax system, but we were not able to reform payroll tax system. Ukraine is ready, and we are discussing this, and there are very good proposals for transforming also this part of the tax system and really change the system. Which means, maybe let me mention also one challenge, because there are also challenges, of course. The biggest important challenge is the communication. Because in general, people support reforms. That's the reason why President, Parliament, and government has legitimacy. But it is very important to explain people that it is important that what it means to support reforms. That, for instance, energy price deregulation are necessary part of the reforms, are necessary tool for fighting against corruption, for to improve economy, for to increase energy efficiency, for to decrease energy dependency on the Russia, and so on, so on, so on. Which means this communication is biggest challenge. Let me conclude by saying that, as almost everybody said here, Ukraine is far below its potential. And for use this potential, of course, necessary precondition is to do reforms, to do comprehensive enough, complex enough, if you want, radical enough reforms. And I'm deeply convinced that it is what is going on, and I'm deeply convinced that this time is different. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear ministers, I'm a minister for EU integration from Serbia, and I was predicted to speak at the general session, but somehow we agreed that I will speak on this session. But nevertheless, I think the EU integration aspect is very important also for your economic reforms. First of all Southeast and, of course, East European countries, we are also non-EU countries, we are candidate country, are in various accession stages, are largely dependent on direct foreign investment, which are certainly important element of our sustainable economic growth. Of course, that EU investors accounted for a major part of foreign direct investment in all these countries, and however, the fact is that due to current economic crisis in the Eurozone, the investments certainly inflow from EU declined. So therefore, there is a battle for direct foreign direct investments. Also in Serbia, we have undertaken several very important measures of fiscal consolidations, reduction of salaries in public sector, reduction of pensions that have been already very low, but also restructuring non-privatized companies with several strategic partnership, sell of assets, sell of different models. You know that better than me, but certainly it is very important to be on EU integration road. You have also chosen that road, and you have ratified SAA as a first step, and I really hope and Serbia supports your EU integration path. We hope that you will be in near future maybe a candidate country. That means a lot of legislative changes, adopting a new legislative framework. For example, in Serbia we have adopted new labor law, and you can imagine how difficult it was to adopt new labor law, but also new bankruptcy law, new privatization law, structuring and planning law, to reduce the administration, the bureaucracy, because investors for some times waited in Serbia for almost a year or 2 years to get some permissions, etc. Now it's for 28 days. So those are examples of concrete steps maybe maybe it's it's not worthless. That's for sure. Maybe we cannot see in our statistics, in our figures yet, but certainly for next year, we hope that it will be very visible in our budget. But also, very important thing, because all these reforms we started, we made a precaution arrangement with IMF, and I can tell you that in first quarter of this year, we had lower budget deficit than we expected. So first outcomes are visible, and I really hope that Ukraine, of course, difficult political situation, security situation, we know all. We were during 90s in very difficult situation, we understand, and that's why I'm here today on behalf of the government of Serbia to show solidarity and empathy with all those people that have lost their homes. And believe me, still 15 years after, we still have problems with internally displaced person and refugees, and no matter bad economic situation, I just want to say that we agreed on last week government session to donate 100,000 euros. Maybe it's not a big amount, but it's a symbolical gesture from Serbia. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm probably one of the last speakers to speak here, so I'd like to say well done to the government of Ukraine in terms of the conference, because you managed to collect so many high-caliber people, and you made it in such a short period of time. So I'd like to thank you for that, and I think it's important for the government and for the country of Ukraine. Since we are here in order to evaluate what kind of reform process do we have, I'd like to send a few words, a few messages from the business community. I'd like to mention that the government during these 15 years, which I'm monitoring the situation in the country, I should say that government is really far better than we used to have in the past. So obviously it's one of the best governments Ukraine ever had. Why? Of course, there are different arguments for that. Of course, I'll put aside like English-speaking skills of this government, but nevertheless, if to compare from business, I must say that actually they are the ones who are responding on SMS. They are responding on mobile almost on a daily basis, and they actually are able to communicate better with business. When it comes to changes, I think that the changes are happening, and we see changes in the National Bank of Ukraine, we see changes in the Ministry of Economy, we see changes in the Ministry of Finance, of Agriculture. But of course, we should not say that the speed of reforms is really accurate. You could drive probably faster, and we, from the business point of view, we would like you to motivate for better change, for more changes, because we really need that. The third message I'd like to send, that actually voice of business is heard. That's obvious. And actually from the business point of view, we'd like to say that we'd like you to concentrate to 2 or 3 key reforms and complete them. Make the success stories of those reforms so that we from the business community can feel that you are capable to complete everything which you've started for. Then the fourth thing is communication. Ivan Miklas already told that actually that communication is important, and this is something which you should probably work more a little bit on that, because I think that so far there are certain things needs to be improved in this area, because sometimes you're doing a really fantastic job and you've done a lot of things which we couldn't even expect, but it's necessary to communicate and communicate. Please use allies like business associations, like Chamber of Commerce. You do use us, but nevertheless we need to communicate and work more. And final thing which I wanted to make is actually to say that business climate is not rosy, of course. It's not ideal, of course. It's not friendly, it's not inviting, but nevertheless I think